Who Owns the Future by Jaron Lanier, Chapter 1, Motivation. We're used to treating information as free, but the price we pay for the illusion of free is only workable so long as most of the overall economy isn't about information. Today, we can still think of information as the intangible enabler of communications, media, and software. But as tech advances in the country, our present intuition about the nature of information will be remembered as narrow and short-sighted. We can think of information narrowly only because sectors like manufacturing, energy, healthcare, and transportation aren't yet particularly automated or net-centric, internet-centric. So then he gets into this idea that productivity will become software mediated. And he argues that software could be the final industrial revolution so that it would maybe subsume all of the revolutions to come. So, and like this is important right off the bat, and it's going to be hard not to just read everything, but it could happen, for instance, once cars and trucks are driven by software instead of human drivers, or 3D printers magically turning out what had once been manufactured goods. Automated heavy equipment finds and mines natural resources. Robot nurses handle the material aspects of caring for the elderly. Or maybe, digital technology won't advance enough in this century to dominate the economy, but it probably will. And if not soon, and not, in our lifetime, probably in the next couple. Maybe technology will then make all the needs of life so inexpensive that it would be virtually free to live well, and no one will worry about money, jobs, wealth disparities, or planning for old age. He strongly doubts that neat picture would unfold, and I agree with that. So what he says here, he says that his goal here, one of his goals of this book is to portray an alternate future in which people are treated appropriately as being special, as being, and I kind of have a qualm with the way that he phrases that, but it's also within the context that the companies that are controlling sort of the flow of data, or the most successful people today, are the people who control the data of everybody. The value of the internet right now is in the data of the people. And these companies don't treat every individual person and their contributions to this data ecosystem as very special. They consider the data special, but not the individual's contribution special. So he wants to reframe our position on this to appropriately assess the individual's data as significant or special or significant to that economy, which is just seems like common sense. But anyway, so that's his goal. And, how does he want to accomplish that? Pay people for information gleaned from them if that information turns out to be valuable. That's that's the basics of our economy, of the exchange of goods or ideas or services. And maybe that's we've always looked at economy as the exchange of goods and services. Do we need to reframe that as goods, services, and information? And let me be clear too. I know maybe it's because I probably delivered that in a way that didn't do it justice because I've accepted this term, this idea. But when I first was exposed to it, it was radical. I understand the feeling and I understand the hesitancy to want to believe something like that we would have to pay for information. That seems counter intuitive to everything that we've learned up until this point. but we'll explain why and how that makes sense. An amazing number of people offer an amazing amount of value over networks, but the lion's share of wealth now flows to those who aggregate and route those offerings rather than those who provide the raw materials. A new kind of middle class and a more genuine growing information economy could come about if we break out of the free information idea and into a universal micro-payment system. We might even be able to strengthen individual liberty and self-determination, even when the machines get very good. This is a book about futurist economics, but it's really about how we can remain human beings as our machines become so sophisticated. I'm just calling out this word, speculative advocacy. And then he gets into Moore's law. So Moore's law changes the way people are valued. The primary influence on the way technologists have come to think about the future since the turn of the century is their direct experience of digital networks through consumer electronics. It only takes a few years, not a lifetime, for a young person to experience Moore's law-like changes. So briefly and poorly explained, Moore's law in technology has to do with computing power. And it's this idea that computing power, it has a compounding nature. So then he goes on to say, like, they don't just accumulate improvements in the way that a pile of rocks gets higher when you add more rocks. Instead of being added, the improvements multiply. The technology seems to always get twice as good every 2 years or so. That means after 40 years of improvements, microprocessors have become millions of times better. So instead of a steady line, it's this curved line with an almost vertical growth potential in computing power and ability. So what does this mean for everything? Well, Moore's law means that more and more things can be done practically for free, if only it weren't for those people who want to be paid. I said that weird, but that's supposed to be like a kind of like a joke. People are on the... It used to be that printing presses were expensive, so paying newspaper reporters seemed like a natural expense to fill the pages, right? But when the news became free, that anyone would want to be paid at all started to seem unreasonable. Moore's law can make salaries and social safety nets seem like unjustifiable luxuries. And so here I said, holy shit. So another, and this is actually not related precisely to what's being said, but I'll say it now, but I want to elaborate on it later. Another positive consequence of paying for the internet, paying for networks, paying for the digital world, is that the value of what you're paying for is going to be, like, we don't really concern ourselves with the value of what we're consuming right now because it's all free. So if you have to pay for it, you have to become more selective, and that inherently creates a value system. So value takes precedent now. And so it's one way that, like, this anti-intellectual moment that we're in can be reversed, because value would be placed on the content you're consuming. intelligence then would be of value. The cloud is driven by statistics, and even in the worst individual cases of personal ignorance, dullness, idleness, or irrelevance, every person is constantly feeding data into the cloud these days. Instead of the blindness of our standards of accounting to all that value is, okay, every person is constantly feeding. The value of such information could be treated as genuine, but it is not. Instead, the blindness of our standards of accounting to all that value is gradually breaking capitalism. There is no long-term difference between an ordinary person and a skilled person in this scheme. So a great example of this, and I love that it comes up so early. Musical recording was a mechanical process until it wasn't, and it became a network service. At one time, a factory stamped out musical discs, trucks delivered them to retail stores, salespeople sold them. While that system has not been entirely destroyed, it is certainly more common to simply receive music instantly over a network. There used to be a substantial middle-class population supported by the recording industry, but no more. The principal beneficiaries of the digital music business are the operators of network services that mostly give away the music in exchange for gathering data to improve those dossiers and software models of each person. This is huge. And he goes on to say how this could be the same thing could happen in surgery with nanorobots and all of that surgeons, like in the music industry, would just be sort of the information providers, the data collectors. And so where would the value of surgeons be if that process was automated? But back to the music thing, that there used to be a healthy middle class in the music industry, not just with the supporting players, although I did have this idea of the middle class is made up of middlemen, that those middle ground processes, systems are what the middle class is. That's the delivery, that's the the sales, right? In that process, there's the creator, the distribution, and the consumer, and the middle is the middle class. So, but beyond that, there was also a middle class in musicianship, studio employees, things like that, that have kind of been eroded. So, so that's what happens when you go direct to consumer on everything. And this speaks to the larger issue that all of the tech integrations, and something that I've been speaking about who's benefiting from tech integrations, all of these things are aimed at automating those roles, which therefore eliminates them, which eliminates the middle class. It automates them in such a way that people of a higher class level can just integrate it into their work with not that much lift. It's the same amount of work that it would have been to communicate with the middlemen in the first place. Utopians presume the advent of abundance, not because it will be affordable, but because it will be free, provided we accept surveillance. Starting back in the early 1980s, an initially tiny stratum of gifted technologists conceived new interpretations of concepts like privacy, liberty, and power. I was an early participant in the process, and helped to formulate many of the ideas I am criticizing in this book. And I called that out because I really wanted to highlight he was very instrumental in building the foundations of everything that we're experiencing. So he's one, I love that he has the self-awareness to say, I was a part of this, I was wrong, and I want to fix it. But also it lends to his credibility in all of this. Like, he was there as part of the beginning, and now he's saying all of the stuff that you're talking about is stuff that I was saying in the 80s. This is like, I'm telling you, like, that's wrong. Like, I built that. I know it better than you. And here I'm telling you it's flawed. Making information free is survivable so long as only limited numbers of people are disenfranchised. As much as it pains me to say so, we can survive if we only destroy the middle classes of musicians, journalists, and photographers. What is not survivable is the additional destruction of the middle classes in transportation, manufacturing, energy, office work, education, and healthcare. And all that destruction will come surely enough if the dominant idea of an information economy isn't improved. We want free online experiences so badly that we are happy to not be paid for information that comes from us now or ever. That sensibility also implies that the more dominant information becomes in our economy, the less most of us will be worth. I'll pause there to like, that's wild to me. This connects to the idea of sacrificing freedom for security. Although in this ironic twist is that, well, actually, no, this is the same thing. It's not even an ironic twist. That when that happens, you are exposed to neither freedom nor security. And in this case, people aren't understanding that their willingness to give up these freedoms to use this stuff, just to use it, is actually coming at it's a short-term versus long-term thing. The long-term has way more dire consequences. And again, we talk about disruption. Like, that was probably one of the biggest buzzwords of the 2010s. Maybe that's becoming synonymous with disenfranchisement. We're trying to do this across every industry, and it's based on this flawed system. So as we're getting close to these things that will disenfranchise things like transportation and energy and things like that, we're doing it in a way that has very significant problematic consequences in the future. The greatest fortunes in history have been created recently by using network technology as a way to concentrate information and therefore wealth and power. This is exactly what I've been talking about, that the tech integrations benefit the corporations, the biggest players in this. It has a compounding effect in the tech available to them, the money that they're generating, and it concentrates it and consolidates it at the top. However, in the long term, this way of using network technology is not even good for the richest and most powerful players, because their ultimate source of wealth can only be a growing economy. And this is, again, a human nature flaw here, is we see the future based on the past and our current. Like, so we always assume we've seen steady growth in the stock market, the market. of like 2% every year. And it's been on this upward trajectory for so long that we can't imagine it not continuing to go up indefinitely. But that's flawed thinking. And so some of the worst offenders of that thought system are the wealthy people who continue to generate more wealth. They think that is certainly the case. That's only because our economy has been growing. If you start disenfranchising people and making it harder to exist for a significant population, that economy isn't going to grow, and therefore then even the wealthy people will start to feel it. Which tangent idea here too is that it's kind of like what had been buzzing around the idea of free speech, is that you don't really advocate for it until you directly have experienced a situation where you're being infringed on in that point. It's the same with the market and the economy. Wealthy people have been, even during the recession scare and during the pandemic and after, the wealthy people were making record profits. So it won't be until they start feeling it that they will be inclined to change anything. And the problem with that thinking in this context is that at that point, it will be too late. The more advanced technology becomes, the more all activity becomes mediated by information tools. Therefore, as our economy turns more fully into an information economy, it will only grow if more information is monetized instead of less. That's not what we're doing. Even the most successful players of the game are gradually undermining the core of their own wealth. Capitalism only works if there are enough successful people to be the customers. A market system can only be sustainable when the accounting is thorough enough to reflect where the value comes from, which I'll demonstrate is another way of saying that an information age middle class must come into being. I'm tying this into, I'll tie this into the next part. Two great trends are colliding, one in our favor and the other against us. Solving one problem creates new ones. So, balancing our heavenly expectations, there are also countervailing fears about such things as global climate change and the problem of finding food and drinking water for the human population when it peaks later in this century. So when we had like the baby boomers, when we had this huge boom of population growth, one of the initial concerns was with food and water scarcity. And then there was this interesting phenomenon where as the population growth rose to these record highs, we had more food available, more choice than ever, and it was more easily accessible than ever. But here's my tie-in. That was the concern, and we hit this point, or we're at this point right now where we've lived long enough in this experience of hyperpopulation growth, or elevated population levels, and plenty of food supply. But zoom out and look at how that is possible. All of the things that go into place, the transportation, the large scale use of agriculture, the different strategies to farm, to produce all of this stuff, and its effect on the earth, on the world, all of these things, right? Our cost of the population growth is exhausting the Earth's resources and harming the Earth in the process. So it's unsustainable is the issue. So the consequence is coming. It just hasn't been achieved yet or fully realized. The ability to grow a larger population through reduced infant mortality rates sets up the conditions for a greater famine. People are cracking the inner codes of biology, creating amazing new chemistries, and amplifying our capabilities with digital networks, just as we are also undermining our climate and critical resources are starting to run out. And yet we are compelled to plunge forward because history isn't reversible. Progress is never free of politics. The calculi of digital utopias and man-made disasters don't contradict each other. They can coexist. Basics like water and food could soar in cost even as intensely sophisticated gadgets like automated nanorobotic heart surgeons float about as dust in the air in case they are needed, sponsored by advertisers. Everything can't become free at once because the real world is messy, software and networks are messy, and the sprawling miracle of information animated technology rests on limited resources. The illusion that everything is getting so cheap that it is practically free sets up the political and economic conditions for cartels exploiting whatever isn't quite that way. When music is free, wireless bills get expensive, insanely so. You have to look at the whole system. No matter how petty a flaw might be in a utopia, that flaw is where the full fury of power seeking will be focused. So then wrapping it up with this vision, this visualization of a potential experience in the future based on the direction that we're heading. You sit at the edge of the ocean, wherever the coast will be after Miami is abandoned to the waves. You are thirsty. Random little clots of dust are full-on robotic interactive devices, since advertising companies long ago released plagues of smart dust upon the world. That means you can always speak and some machine will be listening. I'm thirsty. I need water. The seagull responds, you are not rated Okay. The seagull responds, you are not rated as enough of a commercial prospect for any of our sponsors to pay for the fresh water for you. You say, but I have a penny. Water costs 2 pennies. There's an ocean 3 feet away. Just desalinate some water. Desalination is licensed to water carriers. You need to subscribe. However, you can enjoy free access to any movie ever made, or pornography, or simulation of deceased family member for you to interact with as you die from dehydration. Your social networks will be automatically updated with the news of your death. And finally, don't you want to play that last penny at the casino that just repaired your heart? You might win big and be able to enjoy it. So like this is crazy that it goes back to this dystopian idea. It's you're not rated as enough of a commercial prospect for any of our sponsors to pay for fresh water for you. It's the dystopian corporate power dynamic. Like we need to break free from the power dichotomy or the power, polarization of it just being like countries and religion. There's a new one, and it's the commercial interests. And so if they control everything, and if they control the acts, that's the thing, is they are the mediums, they are the middleman. So they'll control the flow of everything. And so in this case of the dystopian experience, you're not we see this. That's what the credit system is like. Or there's a Black Mirror episode where your social currency dictates your status in the world. That last part is way more consequential. It should be more illuminating than I am conveying right now. It's it speaks to this, like, technology makes things feel free, right? They talked about, you don't even know you have a heart condition. These dust clutters, the seagull says, we have your software. We have software to fix your heart right now, right? And it's like, theoretically, that would be free, right? You can get heart surgery on a beach without even really thinking about it. You can you can consume any amount of information you could possibly want. You can communicate to these technological beings at any given moment. There is something always listening for you to communicate to. But then at the end of the day, the fundamental thing, the water, the food supplied, when those things become the only thing that you're really paying for, and you have no way to, generate that value, right? Like, everything else except for the things you need become accessible and free. I don't know. I'm missing the mark on exactly what I wanted to say, but anyway, that's chapter 1.